They say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes blood can drown you. My name is Aurora, and for 38 years, I lived as a ghost in my own family. Not because I was dead, but because I was invisible, completely and utterly invisible to the people who were supposed to love me most. It all started the day my sister Layla was born. I was 8 years old, standing in a sterile hospital hallway, clutching my grandmother's hand as chaos erupted around us. Layla had arrived 3 months early, weighing barely 3 pounds, her tiny body fighting for every breath in the NICU. The doctors weren't sure she'd make it through the night, but she did. And from that moment forward, everything changed. My parents, David and Linda, transformed overnight. The house that had once felt warm and welcoming became a shrine to Layla's survival. Every medical milestone was celebrated like a national holiday. Her first breath without assistance, her first successful feeding, her first pound gained. Each achievement was met with tears of joy, photographs, and detailed journal entries that my mother kept religiously. Meanwhile, I watched from the sidelines. At 8 years old, I didn't understand why my parents suddenly seemed to forget I existed. When Layla finally came home after 4 months in the hospital, our house became a medical facility. Oxygen tanks lined the hallways, monitors beeped constantly, and my parents took shifts watching her around the clock. I remember the first time I brought home a perfect report card after Layla arrived. All A's, including an A+ in advanced mathematics that my teacher had specifically praised. I burst through the front door, excited to share my accomplishment, only to find my parents huddled around Layla's crib, celebrating the fact that she had slept for 3 consecutive hours. "Mom, Dad, look!" I held up my report card, practically bouncing with excitement. My mother glanced over briefly, her attention immediately returning to Layla. "That's nice, honey, did you see? Layla's color looks so much better today." That was it. No congratulations, no proud moment, no photograph for the family album. Just a dismissive acknowledgement before the focus returned to where it always was, on Layla. As the months turned into years, this pattern solidified into something that felt permanent. Layla's survival had branded her as the miracle child, the precious gift that had to be protected and celebrated at every turn. And I became the afterthought. The child who was healthy and capable, and therefore required no special attention. By the time Layla turned 5 and I was 13, the favoritism had become so ingrained in our family dynamic that I stopped expecting anything different. Layla's finger paintings were framed and displayed prominently in the living room. My honor roll certificates were stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, usually covered by grocery lists or appointment reminders within days. When Layla scored her first goal in her recreational soccer league, a tiny kick that barely rolled past the goalie, my parents took the day off work to celebrate. They bought her a trophy, threw a party, and invited extended family to commemorate the achievement. When I was selected for the varsity debate team as a sophomore, the youngest student in school history to make the cut, my mother said she was proud and then immediately launched into a story about how articulate Layla was becoming. The most painful part wasn't the lack of recognition, it was the way my accomplishments were consistently overshadowed or dismissed. At family gatherings, relatives would ask about my grades, my activities, my plans for the future. But before I could finish answering, my parents would interrupt to share Layla's latest milestone, no matter how minor. "Aurora made the National Honor Society," my aunt would say proudly. "That's wonderful," my mother would reply quickly, "but you should see Layla's progress in reading. She's almost caught up to her grade level now." Almost caught up. While I was exceeding expectations in advanced placement courses, Layla's struggles were treated as triumphs worthy of celebration. I began to understand that in my parents' eyes, Layla's ordinary achievements were extraordinary because of her difficult start in life, while my extraordinary achievements were ordinary because they came naturally to me. High school became my escape. I threw myself into academics with an intensity that concerned my teachers but felt necessary to me. If I couldn't get attention for being good, maybe I could earn respect for being exceptional. I joined every academic club, volunteered for every extra credit opportunity, and studied until my eyes burned. The summer before my senior year, I worked 3 jobs to save money for college applications and SAT prep courses. While Layla attended expensive summer camps and specialized tutoring sessions that my parents claimed were investments in her future, I was serving ice cream at the local parlor, babysitting neighborhood kids, and helping my grandmother with her small antique restoration business. It was in my grandmother's dusty workshop that I first learned about jewelry authentication. She had a small collection of vintage pieces that needed evaluation, and she taught me how to identify hallmarks, test metals, and spot reproduction techniques. What started as a way to help my grandmother became a genuine fascination. "You have an eye for this," she told me one afternoon as I correctly identified a 1,942nd Tiffany bracelet among a box of costume jewelry. "Most people your age can't tell silver from tin." That comment planted a seed that would eventually grow into something life-changing, though I didn't know it at the time. Senior year arrived with the pressure of college applications and the promise of freedom. I had spent months researching universities, scholarship opportunities, and financial aid options, knowing that my parents' college fund had been redirected toward Layla's ongoing medical expenses and educational support. I didn't resent the financial reality Layla's needs were legitimate. But I did resent the assumption that I would figure it out on my own while she would be supported through every challenge. The SAT preparation consumed my autumn. While my classmates were attending homecoming parties and football games, I was working through practice tests and vocabulary flashcards. I had calculated exactly what score I needed for a full scholarship to a top-tier university, and I was determined to achieve it. The day I received my SAT results, I could barely contain my excitement. 1,590 out of 1,600, a near-perfect score that placed me in the 99th percentile nationally. It was the kind of achievement that should have resulted in celebration, college recruiters calling, and parents bragging to anyone who would listen. I rushed home from school, the email confirmation printed and clutched in my trembling hands. My parents were in the kitchen, helping Layla with her homework. At 14, she was still receiving extensive academic support, and every assignment was a family project. "Mom, Dad," I announced breathlessly, "I got my SAT scores back." They looked up with mild interest. "How did you do?" my father asked. 1,590, I said, waiting for their reaction. "Out of 1,600. It's the highest score anyone from our school has gotten in 5 years. My mother smiled. "That's great, honey. We knew you'd do well." That was it. No excitement, no congratulations, no acknowledgement of the significance of the achievement. They turned back to Layla's math homework as if I had just announced what I had for lunch. But Layla's reaction was different. She looked up at me with something that might have been awe. "Is that really good?" she asked. "It's really good," I confirmed, trying to keep the disappointment out of my voice. "Wow," she said quietly, and for a moment, I felt seen by at least one member of my family. The scholarship offers started arriving in February. Full rides to prestigious universities, academic honors, programs, and opportunities I had only dreamed about. The University of Michigan offered me not just tuition coverage, but a spot in their selective honors college and a research fellowship that would begin my freshman year. When I told my parents about the Michigan offer, my mother's first question was whether I would be close enough to come home frequently to help with Layla. My father worried about how they would manage Layla's schedule without my assistance. Neither of them expressed pride in my accomplishment or excitement for my future. That night, I sat in my bedroom with acceptance letters spread across my desk like treasure maps to different versions of my life. For the first time in years, I felt truly hopeful. College would be my chance to start over, to be valued for my abilities, to build relationships with people who saw me as more than a supporting character in someone else's story. I chose Michigan, not just for the academics, but for the distance. 4 hours away, far enough to create space, close enough to return for genuine emergencies. College was a revelation. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who noticed my contributions, valued my opinions, and celebrated my successes without qualification or comparison. I threw myself into my studies with the same intensity I had brought to high school, but now it felt joyful rather than desperate. My major was business with a focus on entrepreneurship, but I continued pursuing my interest in jewelry authentication as a hobby. The university had an extensive art history program, and I took electives in decorative arts, gemology, and art authentication techniques. My professors were impressed by my natural aptitude and encouraged me to consider it as more than just a side interest. Meanwhile, my relationship with my family settled into a predictable pattern. I called home weekly, visited during major holidays, and sent occasional care packages. My parents shared updates about Layla's progress and challenges, but rarely asked detailed questions about my own life. When they did inquire about my studies, their attention would drift after a few minutes. During my sophomore year, Layla started high school. Despite years of additional support and resources, she was still struggling academically and socially. My parents were considering private schools, additional tutoring, and various interventions to help her succeed. The financial stress was evident, though they tried to hide it during my visits home. It was during this time that I started my first small business. Using the authentication skills I had developed, I began offering jewelry evaluation services to fellow students who had inherited pieces from grandparents or wanted to sell items for extra money. Word spread quickly, and I was soon getting referrals from local antique shops and estate sale companies. What started as a way to earn spending money quickly grew into something more substantial. I was making several $100s a month, which felt like a fortune to a college student. But more importantly, I discovered that I had a genuine talent for this work. I could spot fakes, identify rare pieces, and provide valuations that proved accurate when clients sought second opinions. By junior year, I had established relationships with auction houses, estate attorneys, and insurance companies who needed reliable authentication services. My little side business was generating enough income to cover my living expenses and build a small savings account. I never mentioned this growing success to my parents. It seemed pointless to share something they wouldn't understand or appreciate, especially when their focus remained entirely on Layla's struggles and needs. Besides, I was learning the value of financial independence, and I liked the security of having money that was entirely my own. The summer before my senior year, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of returning home, I stayed in Ann Arbor to expand my business. I rented a small space near campus and officially registered as a limited liability company. Aurora's authentication services was born, though at the time it felt more like an ambitious experiment than the foundation of a future empire. That summer, I handled my first major authentication project, a collection of Art Deco jewelry that a local family was considering for auction. The pieces turned out to be worth significantly more than the family had imagined, and my accurate assessment helped them achieve a sale price of over $200,000. My commission was $8,000, more money than I had ever seen at one time. I was 21 years old, about to enter my senior year of college, and I had just proven to myself that I could build something meaningful entirely on my own. Senior year flew by in a blur of business growth and academic achievement. My authentication services had evolved from a college side hustle into a legitimate company with a growing reputation. I was handling increasingly valuable collections and building relationships with major auction houses in Detroit and Chicago. Graduation day arrived with the usual family dynamics. My parents attended the ceremony, took obligatory photos, and expressed appropriate pride. But even this milestone was tinged with their concern about Layla, who was struggling through her sophomore year of high school. During the celebration dinner, most of the conversation centered on their worries about her college prospects and whether she would need additional support. I had been accepted to several MBA programs, but I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I turned down graduate school to focus on my business full-time. My parents were confused by this choice, assuming I was simply taking a gap year before pursuing real career options. "You can't make a living looking at old jewelry," my father said dismissively. "It's a nice hobby, but you need something stable." I didn't argue. By that point, my hobby was generating more income than his management position at the local manufacturing plant, but I saw no benefit in sharing that information. Instead, I moved into a small apartment near Detroit and quietly began building what would become one of the most successful authentication businesses in the Midwest. The growth was exponential. As my reputation spread, I began receiving referrals from insurance companies, law firms handling estate disputes, and collectors around the country. I developed relationships with experts in specific periods and styles, building a network that could handle everything from ancient Roman coins to contemporary designer pieces. By my 25th birthday, I was employing 3 full-time specialists and had moved into a proper office space. My personal income had reached 6 figures, and the business was valued at over $1 million. I was living comfortably but modestly, investing most of my profits back into the company and building a substantial savings account. Throughout this period, my family continued to treat me as though I was barely getting by. During holiday visits, my parents would slip me money for expenses and suggest that I consider finding a more stable career. They assumed that my reluctance to discuss work details meant the business was struggling, when in reality, I was simply tired of being dismissed. Layla, meanwhile, had managed to graduate high school and was attending community college. She was studying general education courses without a clear direction, and my parents were funding her education while also paying for ongoing academic support. The financial strain on them was becoming more evident, though they never directly asked me for help. It was during this time that I made a decision that would define the next decade of my relationship with my family. I set up an anonymous monthly transfer of $7,000 to my parents' bank account. To them, it appeared to be some kind of financial aid or windfall, maybe a distant relative's estate settlement or an insurance payout they had forgotten about. I never claimed credit for the payments, and they never connected them to me. The money made a significant difference in their lives. They could afford better health care for Layla, reduce their financial stress, and even take occasional vacations. Watching from a distance, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. I was finally able to provide the support they needed, but only by maintaining the fiction that it had nothing to do with me. My 30s brought unprecedented success and equally unprecedented loneliness. The business had evolved far beyond authentication services. We now handled acquisitions for major collectors, consulted on museum exhibits, and provided expert witness testimony in high-stakes legal cases involving disputed provenance and insurance fraud. By 35, my personal net worth had reached $8 million. The company employed 23 people across 3 locations and maintained partnerships with auction houses, insurance companies, and law enforcement agencies nationwide. I owned a beautiful home in an exclusive suburb, drove a luxury car, and traveled internationally for both business and pleasure. Yet during family gatherings, I remained the same invisible daughter I had always been. My parents would ask polite questions about my little business and then spend hours discussing Layla's latest challenges and achievements. Layla had completed her associate's degree and was working in retail while living at home. Every small success in her life was celebrated as a major triumph, while my growing empire remained largely unnoticed and unacknowledged. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was sending my parents more money each month than most people earned in a year. Yet they continued to worry about my financial stability. The anonymous transfers had become so routine that they now simply budgeted around this mysterious monthly windfall, never questioning its source too deeply. During one particularly difficult Thanksgiving, When the conversation had focused exclusively on Layla's promotion to assistant manager at her retail job, I found myself wondering what would happen if my family knew the truth about my success. Would they finally see me? Would they be proud? Or would they simply find new ways to make Layla's struggles seem more important than my achievements? I was about to find out, though not by choice. The previous year, I had begun working on my most ambitious project, yet a comprehensive authentication of a private collection that had been assembled over 3 generations. The project was worth over $2 million in fees and required extensive international travel and research. It was the kind of work that established my company as the premier authentication service in North America. But success at this level came with new challenges. I was working longer hours, managing complex logistics, and dealing with increasingly high-stakes situations. The stress was taking a toll, and I found myself looking forward to the upcoming holiday season as a chance to rest and reconnect with family, even if that connection felt largely one-sided. I should have known that nothing in my family was ever simple. Layla had been having what my parents euphemistically called a difficult year. She had quit her retail job after conflicts with management, moved back in with our parents full-time, and was struggling with what appeared to be depression and anxiety. My parents were worried about her financial future and her ability to live independently. During our weekly phone calls, they had begun making subtle hints about family obligations and the importance of helping each other through difficult times. I assumed they were building up to asking for advice or perhaps a small loan. I had no idea they were actually building up to something much more dramatic. The stage was set for a confrontation that had been 30 years in the making, though I was walking into it completely unprepared for what was about to unfold. Thanksgiving 2023 started like every other holiday gathering in my family. I arrived at my parents' house with expensive wine and gourmet desserts, gifts that were accepted graciously but without much comment. The house was full of extended family aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends who had gathered for what my mother always called her gratitude celebration. I had brought my laptop, intending to catch up on some administrative work during quiet moments. A major authentication project was reaching its deadline, and I needed to finalize some documentation. I set up in my old childhood bedroom, the same space where I had once studied for the SATs and dreamed of escape. The dinner conversation followed its predictable pattern. Layla's recent struggles with finding new employment became the central topic, with various relatives offering advice and support. My parents shared their concerns about her future and their hope that she would find her direction soon. When attention briefly turned to me, I offered the usual vague updates about business being steady and life being good. Aurora always was the independent one, my aunt commented. Never needed much help or attention. The comment stung, though it was meant as a compliment. Even my positive qualities were framed in terms of my not needing the support and recognition that everyone else deserved. After dinner, I retreated to my room to work on the authentication documents. The project involved a collection of Cartier pieces from the 1922nd, and I was finalizing the provenance research that would support a $3.2 million insurance valuation. The work required absolute concentration, and I was grateful for the quiet space away from the family gathering. I had been working for about an hour when Layla knocked on my door. Her mood had been dark throughout dinner, and I assumed she wanted to vent about the job situation or family pressure. I saved my work and turned to face her, trying to project the supportive older sister role I had played for so many years. "Hey," I said gently. "How are you holding up? I know everyone means well, but all that advice can feel overwhelming." Layla's expression was strange, angry, but also something else I couldn't identify. "I'm fine," she said shortly. "What are you working on?" "Just some boring business stuff," I replied, moving to close the laptop. "Documentation and reports. Nothing interesting." "Can I see?" she asked. And before I could respond, she had stepped around me and was looking at the screen. What she saw was a detailed authentication report with my company letterhead, client information redacted, but the valuation amounts clearly visible. She could see the $3.2 million figure, the scope of the project, and the professional documentation that indicated this was far from a small operation. "What is this?" she asked, and her voice had changed completely. I realized I was trapped. There was no way to explain away what she had seen. No casual dismissal that would satisfy her questions. After years of carefully maintaining the fiction of my small, struggling business, I had been exposed by my own carelessness. "It's a work project," I said carefully. "Authentication and valuation services for insurance purposes." But Layla was scrolling through the document now, seeing more details, understanding more implications. Her face was cycling through expressions, confusion, realization, and then something that looked like fury. "Aurora," she said slowly, "what exactly do you do for work?" The next 30 minutes changed everything. Once Layla understood what she was looking at, there was no containing her reaction or the information. She demanded to see more files, more evidence of what I had been hiding from the family for over a decade. Against my better judgment, I found myself explaining the scope and success of my business. Watching her face transform from confusion to shock to something that looked like betrayal. "You're telling me," she said, her voice rising, "that you've been rich this entire time?" While mom and dad worry about money, while I'm struggling to find work, while we all think you're barely getting by with some tiny antique business, it's not that simple, I began. But she was already standing up, pacing the small room like a caged animal. How much money, Aurora? How much are you actually worth? I could have lied. I could have downplayed the numbers, made it sound less dramatic than it was, but I was tired of hiding, tired of pretending, tired of being invisible, even to myself. Including the business valuation and personal assets, probably around $12 million. The silence that followed was deafening. Layla stared at me as if I had just confessed to murder. Then, without warning, she turned and walked out of the room. I could hear her footsteps on the stairs, moving quickly toward the kitchen where the entire family was still gathered. Everyone needs to hear this, she announced loudly, her voice carrying through the house. You're not going to believe what Aurora has been hiding from us. I followed her downstairs, my heart pounding, knowing that whatever happened next would be irreversible. The family gathering fell silent as Layla positioned herself in the center of the kitchen, all eyes focused on her dramatic entrance. Our dear sister Aurora, she began, her voice dripping with sarcasm, has been lying to us for years. She's not struggling with a little jewelry business. She's worth $12 million. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Gasps, questions shouted over each other, demands for explanation. My parents looked stunned, then confused, then something that might have been hurt. Extended family members began calculating what this meant, how they had been fooled, what this revealed about me as a person. Is this true? My father asked, his voice quiet but cutting through the noise. I looked around the room at faces that ranged from shocked to accusatory to calculating. These were people who had dismissed my achievements, ignored my successes, and treated me as an afterthought for 30 years. Now they were staring at me with the first genuine attention I had received from them in decades, and it felt like being examined by a hostile jury. Yes, I said simply, it's true. The room erupted again. Questions about why I had hidden this, accusations of selfishness and deception, demands to know what I intended to do with all this money now that they knew about it. But the question that cut deepest came from my mother. How could you let us worry about money when you had all this? She asked, tears starting to form in her eyes. How could you watch us struggle and not help? I wanted to tell her about the $7,000 monthly transfers that had been helping them for years. I wanted to explain that I had been supporting them anonymously because I knew they wouldn't accept help from their supposedly unsuccessful daughter. But in that moment, surrounded by accusatory faces and feeling more alone than I ever had, I realized that the truth would only make things worse. They weren't upset because I had money. They were upset because I hadn't shared it the way they thought I should. What followed was the most painful conversation of my life, though calling it a conversation is generous. It was more like a trial, with me as the defendant and my entire extended family as the prosecution. The accusations came fast and furious, each family member expressing their version of how I had wronged them by keeping my success private. But it was Layla who delivered the most devastating attack. Standing in the center of the kitchen, she had found her moment to shine as the wronged party, the victim of her sister's terrible deception. Do you know what this means? She demanded, addressing the room as much as me. While I've been struggling to find decent work, living at home, barely making ends meet, she's been sitting on millions of dollars. She could have helped me get back on my feet, could have paid for training programs or education, could have helped me start a business of my own. Instead, she let me suffer. The word suffer hung in the air like an accusation. Layla, who had been the center of attention and support her entire life, who had received every advantage my parents could provide, who had been celebrated for achievements that wouldn't have earned a second glance if I had accomplished them this. Layla was claiming to have suffered while I succeeded. You owe me, she continued, her voice gaining strength from the murmurs of agreement around the room. We're sisters. Family is supposed to help family. You should have been supporting me all along. My father joined the chorus. Layla's right, Aurora. This is about family loyalty. You've had the resources to help your sister build a better life, and you chose not to. That's not the daughter we raised. The daughter they raised. The invisible daughter who had worked 3 jobs to pay for her own SAT prep. The daughter who had earned a full scholarship through her own effort while they redirected the college fund to Layla's needs. The daughter who had built a multi-million-dollar business without a penny of family support or even basic recognition. What exactly do you expect me to do? I asked. Though I already knew the answer. Give Layla what she deserves, my mother said firmly. Help her buy a house, start a business, get the education she needs. You have more money than you could ever need. Sharing it with your sister is the right thing to do. The magic number emerged through the collective family negotiation. $2 million. That was what Layla deserved as her share of my success. $2 million that would set her up for life, allow her to buy a house, start a business, and finally achieve the independence that had eluded her. It's not even that much, my uncle chimed in. You'd still have 10 million left. More than enough for anyone. I looked around the room at these people who had shaped my childhood, who had taught me through their actions that my accomplishments didn't matter, that my achievements were ordinary, that my struggles were insignificant compared to Layla's needs. Now they were demanding that I prove my worth through my wallet, that I buy their approval with the money they had never acknowledged I was capable of earning. And if I don't? I asked quietly. The silence that followed was more telling than any words could have been. I could see the answer in their faces, the judgment that had already been passed. If I didn't comply with their demands, I would be officially labeled as selfish, greedy, and disloyal. The invisible daughter would become the villain daughter. Layla sealed my fate with her final argument. This isn't about money, Aurora. This is about whether you actually care about your family. And if you can't do this one thing for me after everything I've been through, then I guess we'll know where we stand. Everything she'd been through. The golden child who had been celebrated, supported, and prioritized her entire life was claiming hardship that somehow entitled her to my success. The room was nodding in agreement, and I realized that this had never been about fairness or family loyalty. It was about maintaining the hierarchy that had defined our family for 30 years, with Layla at the center and me in the supporting role. I had two choices: give in to their demands and cement my role as the family bank account, or stand up for myself and face the consequences of finally becoming visible in the worst possible way. I stood in that kitchen for what felt like an eternity, surrounded by the expectant faces of people who had never truly seen me until they discovered I had something they wanted. The weight of 30 years of invisibility pressed down on me, along with the crushing realization that my family's love had always been conditional. I just hadn't understood the conditions until now. I need some air, I said finally, and walked outside onto the back porch where I had spent so many childhood evenings feeling alone even when surrounded by family. The November air was sharp and clear, and for the first time all day, I could think without the pressure of their stares and demands. I pulled out my phone and did something I had never done before. I looked up the total amount I had secretly sent my parents over the years. $7,000 a month for 8 years came to $672,000. Nearly $750,000 that had improved their lives, reduced their stress, and enabled them to support Layla more fully. Money they had accepted without question when they thought it came from anywhere but me. I thought about the 12-year-old girl who had learned to celebrate her achievements privately, because sharing them only highlighted how little they mattered to the people she loved most. I thought about the 18-year-old who had worked 3 jobs while her parents paid for Layla's summer camps. I thought about the 25-year-old who had started sending anonymous financial support because she couldn't bear to watch her parents struggle, even though they had never acknowledged her struggles. When I walked back into that kitchen, I had made my decision. "I want to tell you all something," I began, and the room fell silent with anticipation. They thought I was going to agree to their demands, going to write Layla a check and restore the family harmony by accepting my role as the provider they had never recognized I already was. For the past 8 years, I've been sending Mom and Dad $7,000 every month, anonymously. The money you thought was some kind of financial aid or windfall? That was me. That's over $600,000 of my money that has been supporting this family while you all worried about my financial stability. The shock on their faces was immediate and complete. My parents looked stricken as they began calculating how their lives had been subsidized by the daughter they had dismissed. But I wasn't finished. I built my business from nothing, with no family support, no recognition, and no encouragement. I've been successful despite being treated as invisible by the people who were supposed to believe in me first. And even after achieving everything I've achieved, the first time you really pay attention to me is when you want something from me. Layla started to speak, but I held up my hand. You want to know why I never told you about my success? Because I knew this would happen. I knew that my achievements would somehow become about what I owe you rather than what I accomplished. I knew that even my success would be measured by how much it benefited Layla. I looked directly at my parents. You raised one daughter to believe she deserved everything and another daughter to believe she deserved nothing. And now you're angry that the daughter who got nothing figured out how to create everything for herself. The room was dead silent. I could see hurt and anger and confusion in their faces. But for the first time in my life, I didn't care about managing their emotions. I was done being the invisible daughter, done being the supporting character in Layla's story, done financing a family that had never invested in me. I won't be giving Layla $2 million, I said clearly. I won't be giving anyone anything. The monthly transfers end today. I'm done being your invisible safety net. I gathered my coat and purse, leaving the laptop and the expensive wine and the carefully chosen gifts. As I reached the front door, my mother called after me. Aurora, please, don't do this. We're family. I turned back one last time to look at them, my parents, my sister, and the extended family who had witnessed this whole humiliating scene. Yes, I said quietly, we are family. And for 30 years, you've shown me exactly what that means to you. I walked out of that house and never looked back. 6 months later, I'm writing this from my home office, where I run a business that employs 43 people and generates annual revenues that would shock the family who once worried about my financial stability. I've donated more money to charity in the past year than they demanded I give to Layla. I've established scholarships for first-generation college students who show promise in entrepreneurship. I changed my phone number, moved to a new address, and blocked them on all social media platforms. The invisible daughter finally disappeared completely, but on her own terms. Some people say that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water. But I've learned that chosen family, the people who see your worth, celebrate your achievements, and support your dreams, is worth more than all the blood relations who only notice you when you have something they want. I'm 38 years old, worth $12 million, and for the first time in my life, I'm not invisible. Not because anyone finally decided to see me, but because I finally decided to stop hiding. The girl who once brought home perfect report cards to empty rooms now runs board meetings where her insights shape million-dollar decisions. The teenager who worked 3 jobs while her sister went to camp now employs dozens of people who depend on her vision and leadership. The young woman who was told she couldn't make a living from looking at old jewelry now consults with museums, auction houses, and collectors around the world. I built an empire from nothing, and I did it while supporting a family who never supported me back. That's not a story about what I owe anyone. That's a story about what I achieved despite everything. And finally, I'm visible to myself, to my employees, to my clients, to the charities I support, and to the chosen family I've built. I'm visible to everyone who matters. The invisible daughter is gone. In her place stands a woman who knows her worth, protects her boundaries, and refuses to apologize for her success. And that woman is free.